please welcome the Atlantic Chief Revenue Officer and Publisher, Alisa McKown.
Hi, everyone. I am Alisa McKown. I am the publisher of The Atlantic. I'm thrilled you all are here today for this important conversation about the future of our climate. The climate crisis is no longer a distant threat, and it's here. It's reshaping our world. And today, we're going to explore how innovation, storytelling, and justice are reshaping our response to a warming planet. Before we begin, I want to thank our underwriter, Allstate, for their support of The Atlantic's journalism today. Also, please silence your cell phones, but keep them on hand. If something you see or hear today resonates with you, we encourage you to share it with your social network. Please use the hashtag TAF25. Now, let's begin the afternoon's conversation. Thank you.
Here to discuss by land, air, and sea, climate innovation shaping the path forward, please welcome author and research scientist Kate Marvel, professor of geophysics at the California Institute of Technology and chief scientist at Arrête Glacier Initiative, Brent Minchew, executive director of New York Sunworks, Manuela Zamora, with Ross Andersen, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
All right, welcome everyone. Kate, I'm gonna start with you. Let's jump right in. I'm hoping that you can kind of set the table for us. You actually work with climate models and you write beautifully about kind of like spinning these kind of future simulated Earths forward in time and seeing all the terrible things that might happen. And so I was hoping that you could kind of tell us, what are you seeing in those models? So like, what's different now than maybe 5 or 10 years ago from what's gonna happen in the future of this planet?
Yeah, so I think I'll begin by answering that question with what is the same. And the same is essentially, we don't know how hot it's gonna get. And when we tell people this, they're like, come on, climate scientists, you had one job. But there are several reasons we don't know how hot it's gonna get. We don't know how hot it's gonna get because we don't know for a given emission of carbon dioxide, how much of that is gonna stay in the atmosphere. And that's because we don't know how the biosphere will respond, the stuff that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to make more of itself. So things like trees, phytoplankton. We don't know how those are going to respond because there is a carbon dioxide fertilization effect. We do see more greenery. But at the same time, it's really hard to take CO2 out of the atmosphere when you're on fire. So we're learning a lot about how the biosphere responds to carbon dioxide emissions. We're also learning a lot about, okay, well, given a particular value of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, how hot does it get? And the reason that we don't know that is because we've never done this experiment before. We have never kicked the Earth that hard. And basically, the uncertainty in how hot it's gonna get in response to, for example, doubling carbon dioxide, boils down to uncertainty in what clouds are gonna do. We have learned a lot about clouds. We have learned how they arrange themselves. We have learned how we see more of some type of cloud, less of some other type of cloud. But clouds are really difficult to get right in a climate model, and clouds are still the wild card. And then the main reason we don't know how hot it's gonna get is we don't know what human beings are gonna do. We don't know what choices society's gonna make. And what the science does say is that the future is still very much in human hands.
Brent, I just want to get kind of the doom and gloom out of the way here up top. You're a glaciologist, which means you work with ice. And you work with models yourselves, right? Like where you're looking at what's going to happen 10, 50, 100 years from now. Tell us about the ice. How quickly are we going to lose it? How is that going to have an effect on sea levels?
Well, we should know the answer to the question of how quickly we're going to lose it. What we can say is that we're losing it at a much faster rate than we expected to some years ago, and that we are continuing to develop more sophisticated models to be able to forecast this. What our current forecasts tell us is that in the best case scenario, sea levels will rise about 50 centimeters or so by the end of the century. So in the lifetime of today's children, basically. And that is under the most aggressive CO2 emissions reduction scenarios. So that's the best case scenario we can hope for. And to give you a sense of scale of this, 50 centimeters, if we translate this into human impact, that's about 50 million people or so displaced in the coming decades. So to a decent approximation, about 1 million people will be displaced for every centimeter of sea level rise. It could be more. So 50 million in historical context is roughly the number of people who were displaced by World War II in Europe, for example. And so that's best case scenario. That's if we meet the most aggressive goals. If we just plot the 20th century trends in sea level rise forward to the end of the 21st century, we get 85 centimeters or more, up to a meter or so of sea level rise. It's 100 million people displaced around the world. And then there are the possible scenarios that are on the table that we're really trying to understand the likelihood of and set a probability to, but that we know to a certainty are possible, and getting up to about 2 meters or so sea level rise by the end of the century. That's 1 billion people exposed. That's hundreds of millions of people displaced and so forth. And these displacement numbers is important to recognize that that's just the people who will live below high tide. That says nothing about the knock-on effects of what happens when people are displaced from the coastlines, which are the most densely populated areas in the world, and run right into the next most densely populated areas in the world, and so forth, as we move forward. So we're working really hard to understand this, and we have some of our uncertainties are related to how hot is this going to get, for example, and then we also have uncertainties in how the ice sheets themselves work and how sensitive are the ice sheets to changes in climate. And so we work on that from collecting more data, building more sophisticated models, and really boring in to try to understand the physics of the system that drive it and set the sensitivities.
Manuela, you work with students in classrooms at New York Sunworks, your organization, and I want to talk about that work in a little bit. But first, just in light of these kind of dire prognostications,
that was the hopeful
section. Since you're talking to kids, with some regularity, what are their attitudes towards all of this? Are they despairing about the future? Are they more hopeful than adults? What's the texture of that?
I think they're definitely more hopeful than adults. I think they see their lives and their future thinking a little bit more outside of the box. It's definitely hard for them to grasp the information. It's a lot of information. It's very abstract. It's not easy. But they also understand the challenges, and they see the future is a little gloom for sure. So we work with kindergarten to 12th grade students. So there is a big range of ages and attitudes and behaviors there. But definitely working with them and with our program, we see a lot of hope.
Kate, you climate communicator is like not a real job title, but it's something that you do really brilliantly. And I wonder how you think about that spectrum, kind of from hope and despair. I've heard people say that sometimes for young people we got to pull back some of that messaging, right, so that they have some sense that there's a future worth striving toward.
Yeah, I have a really complicated relationship with hope.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily anti-hope, but asking, do you hope you can solve the climate crisis is kind of like asking, do you hope you can clean the bathroom? That's a weird question. Just clean the bathroom. You know what to do. And we know what we have to do to address climate change because we know exactly what is causing climate change. It is greenhouse gases, and we know the human actions that emit those greenhouse gases. Yeah. And we know how to do things differently so that we emit fewer or no greenhouse gases. And so there's so much that we can do. We can shift our means of transportation. We can replace our dirty electricity generating plants. We can steward our land more wisely. And there are so many verbs there, and none of them is hope.
You've just written this really wonderful book that kind of looks at climate change through the lens of 9 different human emotions, and some are the usual suspects that you associate with this subject, right? Anger, and fear and this kind of thing, but also wonder is in there. And I wonder, in the conversations that you've had around the book, and just which emotions do you find are most resonating with people? What kind of storytelling is sort of breaking through to the public?
Yeah, I feel like wonder has really resonated because a lot of people forget that we're climate scientists, we're glacier scientists, but we're still scientists. And that means that it is literally our job to find out something new about the world every day. And I think if you go in and you try to shame people, or you try to make them scared, or you tell them that they are a terrible person, they're not gonna say, oh, I wanna hear more from you, right? But if you approach people with a sense of the wonder and gratitude that we live on this amazing planet, and you help people understand why it is that we understand why the Earth has a temperature at all, why we understand the climate, then I think people, you're on a much more solid footing, because people love to feel wonder, and it's a great entry card into talking about all of the other things that we need to talk about.
Manuela, at New York Sunworks, you guys help establish hydroponic farms in classrooms. And when I was first looking into this, I'll admit I was a little taken aback, because when I was young, like mixing kids and hydroponics had a totally different valence. But tell me about how these farms are remarkable. I know you're in something like 350 schools, and they're huge, and there's 100 plants and all these things. Tell me about how that changes the kids' perspectives on some of these questions that we're talking about today.
Yeah, and that really connects to what you just mentioned, because when we transform any space into schools, any classroom into a hydroponic farm, that brings innovation into the daily curricula. It's part of their journey, the daily learning process as kids go into school. And when they enter into these spaces, wonder is precisely what happens, because they are farming from seed to harvest. They are running the systems, they are understanding what the scientific process and the scientific discoveries that happen behind urban farming, and particularly what the lettuces and tomatoes and peppers, cucumbers they are growing year-round in the classroom. They also see in their hands the solutions and doors to innovation. But at the same time, we're bringing, and the students see every time they go into the classroom, that they are thinking out of the box. They are finding solutions to current problems they have. They're not even problems of the future. There's no, many of the schools we work with, there's no access to healthy, fresh vegetables in the neighborhood they work. So it not only ties sustainability science, climate education, but also themes of civic engagement and connection to their communities. So it's really transformative for them, but also for their communities they share with and where they live. And 380 schools in the 5 boroughs, and 150 coming this year, additional.
Do the kids tend to have like a favorite crop or a favorite task associated with these farms?
Yes. Depends on the grade. So first graders love ladybugs, because we do integrated pest management, for example. So they need to use beneficial insects to get rid of the pests, which are usually New York City aphids that love our classrooms too. And that's a great first grade activity and a job. But as they grow, they really love basil is a winner, as well as red sorrel and some other fancy crops they love to experiment. But definitely basil is number one.
Brent, as someone who writes about climate change from time to time, I've gotten to know a lot of glaciologists, and you're the first one, maybe not the last one, but the first one I've met who was once a Marine fighting in legit combat zones. And so I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that experience has informed your kind of approach to climate change.
Yeah, so, Marines are, I think, exemplified by having a real can-do spirit to things.
They clean the bathroom.
They do clean bathrooms, yeah. Eventually you get promoted to the point you don't have to. But, there's a sense of there's an esprit de corps to it. There's this idea of taking a lot of pride in taking on the hardest challenges. And we, often with the least gear, and that's something that we take pride in. But really, we're really focusing on missions and really focusing on and being able to sort of filter out the noise and to focus on what really needs to get done to accomplish a particular mission. And you do it and this spirit of service, this idea that whatever you're doing is not for you, it is for some greater good, right? It is something that you are working toward to defend the country or to do climate science and so forth. And so, I came into being a climate scientist because I sort of found these elements within it that I so loved as being a Marine, this idea that you could take on a considerable challenge. And that challenge offers some opportunity for wonderment, that is discovery and adventure. Right? It offers a sense of esprit de corps. There are lots of people, climate scientists, working in different ways on things, and it has this real deep and clear sense of purpose to it. And so that's what kind of brings into the work that we do to really understand, how rapidly will sea levels rise, what is the likelihood of things, and then start working toward solutions. Ultimately, the question of what can we do about it? What are our options?
Well, let's talk about solutions for a bit. In addition to your work at Caltech, your academic work, you have this organization, ARET.
That's right.
Stop. And the idea is to actually halt glaciers in place where they are, not by reducing carbon emissions, although I know you want us doing that too, but using technology to kind of freeze glaciers in place. Tell us about some of the kind of cool ideas for how people might be able to do that.
Yeah,
Seems really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a considerable challenge. ARET really stands for a thin fin of rock that separates two glacial valleys, and it sort of represents two possible futures, one where we do something and one where we do nothing. It also attaches to this a deeper philosophy of the pursuit of excellence and the fulfillment of higher purpose. And so, hearkening back to the Marine spirit that we were talking about before, the idea behind sort of thinking about, well, let me back up. The largest sources of uncertainty in sea level rise are really attributable to what happens in West Antarctica. That swamps almost everything else in terms of the uncertainties. And West Antarctica is a very special ice sheet because it is resting on the seafloor. And because ice floats, there are buoyancy-driven feedbacks that can be kicked off and have almost certainly been kicked off because the climate has changed. But bringing down emissions and so forth don't stop these feedback processes, right? The domino has been tipped, the fuse has been lit, whatever analogy that you'd like to use. And so we have to think about, obviously we have to reduce emissions. It's like eating a healthy diet and exercising, but this is something that's going to continue no matter what. And so the ideas behind thinking about a solution and thinking about trying to get it to stabilize or at least slow down rates of sea level rise is really motivated by natural phenomena that exist in the area. So glaciers in Antarctica in general, and West Antarctica in particular, tend to freeze themselves to the bed as part of the natural cycle. And when they're frozen to their beds, they are stable by definition, right? So the instability is predicated on the idea that the bed of the glacier is thawed and the glacier is sliding very quickly along the mud and the rock that's at its bed. And so taking the natural analogs as inspiration and things that we can study and collect data on, we can kind of look at this and we say that if we want to slow down rates of sea level rise, potentially stabilize the ice sheet, we need to try to figure out how to freeze the glaciers in place. And so you do that kind of in one of two possible ways, and these are all early stage ideas that need a lot more research. But two possible ideas: you pump out water, you pump out heat. I'm kind of a big fan of the pumping out heat idea. That just means that you install passive heat pumps. These things are called thermosiphons. They've been used for decades to stabilize permafrost in the Arctic and foundations and so forth. They have a long history behind them. But you take these things and you sink them in a glacier. And what this looks like, practically speaking, is you drill a hole to the bed of a glacier and you sink down a pipe that is sealed. In that pipe, you have about 100 pounds of CO2 in it. You pressurize it to about 400 PSI. That's like what an air compressor at Home Depot can do for you. And under those conditions, the CO2 is liquid at the bottom of the pipe. Now, glaciers, because they're sliding along their bed, are much warmer at their bed than they are at their surface. So they absorb, this thing absorbs heat from the bed that vaporizes the CO2 that rises to the surface through buoyancy. The cold air and the cold pipe that's exposed to the atmosphere causes it to recondense. The CO2 moves down. And so by absorbing the heat and vaporizing the CO2 and then recondensing, you release that heat to the atmosphere and you start to slow down the glacier. The interesting thing about doing this kind of thing, well, one, this requires no additional energy input. There are no moving parts. There's no real maintenance to do on these things. And there's an off switch. If some things are going in a direction that we didn't expect, through the years of development and research that we're going to do leading up to this, we can open a valve, we can vent the CO2, and we're done.
Can you do it remotely?
You could do it remotely. Sure. Or I believe you want to go to Antarctica. Maybe we'll send you down there to open valves.
Volunteer.
But important thing from the natural analogs is that we know we don't have to freeze entire glaciers to the bed. We only have to freeze relatively small areas to the bed to make things stop. So there's a famous example that has frozen itself to the bed about 200 years ago. And we know that a significant fraction of that bed is still thawed. There are active rivers and streams and lakes and so forth underneath that glacier, but the glacier has halted.
Kate, I know that previously you've been critical, and I think rightly so, of some of the geoengineering ideas, if this qualifies as geoengineering, like spraying reflective aerosols into the global stratosphere to kind of reflect away sunlight so that it doesn't get too hot. Where does an idea like this kind of fit in that scheme? How do you feel about it? Pretend Brent's not here.
Can't believe you're making me fight a Marine on stage. But I think some context is important, which is that no geoengineering is not an option. The Earth is changing very rapidly, and it's changing because of human activities. Human beings have put 1.5 trillion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is more than all of the infrastructure we've ever built on Earth combined. The sheer amount of stuff that we have put up there, the changes that we have set in motion, are fairly staggering. And so I think a pre-industrial climate, returning back to the stable Holocene, that's not on the cards right now. And so we have to understand the context in which we are making these decisions. I am not per se against geoengineering, I am against stupid geoengineering. And I think the notion that, all we have to do is spray reflective particles in the stratosphere. All we have to do is make clouds brighter. All we have to do is somehow suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and bury it underground. My problem is with the all we have to do there, because these are not scientific problems. These are problems that are going to require buy-in from wide swaths of the community, possibly even the entire globe. And that is something that, as a scientist, is way above my pay grade. And so I think, I am not against literally gluing glaciers to the bottom. But what I am calling for is more thoughtful engagement between us scientists and the wider society that we serve. And I'm really happy that that seems to be embedded in the way that you talk about this.
No fight with the Marine. That was great. Manuela, talk about how I could imagine kids in the classroom being really, I know that like when I was in school, I would have loved to have had like a big, neat hydroponic farm in my classroom, but are they, is this contextualized for them in kind of larger projects of sustainability?
Absolutely. So the goal is not only transform education as we have it currently, so students learn from a different perspective. They learn by being active or actors in what some of the current issues that are related to climate change, and they understand that climate change is caused by human impact, and therefore. Their passion to be farmer scientists, as we call them, as their identity as they participate in the program, opens to them doors to think out of the box while they are farming, while they have a specific project, while they are growing hundreds of pounds of vegetables that they bring home, but also bring to their communities. But they connect to bigger picture issues. They understand there is a connection between humans, technology, and the environment. They are part of that connectivity, and it really connects with the concept of sustainability science. So we're, I think, educating the next generation of critical thinkers that they can read and understand a scientific paper. They can see the difference between facts and ideas, and they can also be innovators themselves as they become, our future leaders, our future scientists, and as well as the future adults that will be in charge.
Before we go, Kate, I was intrigued to learn that you were not always a planetary scientist, that you actually were once a theoretical physicist. And the theoretical physicists I know, they tend to think in these really long cosmic timescales. And I wonder, how has that kind of perspective sort of influenced your work on this subject?
Yeah, so my PhD is in cosmology, which is literally the study of everything. So, very easy, no pressure. And when I was in graduate school, the first planet orbiting another star was discovered. And since we have now identified over 5,000 other planets. And my perspective as a trained theoretical physicist is that every single one of those planets is garbage. The Earth is the only good planet. The Earth is the only planet that's worth anything. People talk about how they want to go to Mars. Do you know how boring Mars is? There is nothing fun there. And it really gives me this appreciation for this beautiful, perfect place where everything and everybody that I love lives. And so I think, the Earth is the only good planet.
All right, that's a good note to go out on. Kate, Brent, Manuela, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'll follow you.
For a conversation produced by our underwriter, Allstate, about the resilience gap, why disaster preparedness still matters, please welcome Rich Locante, Senior Vice President of Government and Industry Relations at Allstate, with The Atlantic's Alice McKown.
Hello, everyone. Thrilled to have you here today for our conversation. Disasters are growing, and as stated, preparedness seems to be shrinking. That's why I'm excited to talk to Rich Locante from Allstate today about how we can understand how we can build resilience better before the storm, explore how we are investing those dollars in preparedness, and how we can get some returns. Rich, first question. Let's start off specifically from a big picture. How do businesses, communities, governments, how do they begin to shift from reaction to resilience?
Thank you, Alice, for having me here today. So I think the first is shifting the thinking really and about how we respond to storms. And as an insurance company, when they think about insurance companies, it's all about, we think about paying claims. It's what happens afterwards. So what we're working to do is to try to get people to start to think and understand how much investment in mitigation and pre-disaster investment can help ensure that people, their lives are less disrupted, jobs are protected, and that community can go on, more uninterrupted. So it's really important to start that conversation. That's where we are now, and we've been working with the U.S. Chamber. That's a key part here to get the word out, certainly, because it's important for everyone to understand, and not just to hear it from an insurance company like Allstate, but to work in a public-private partnership with the U.S. Chamber. And that really matters. But it's really getting the conversation going and having people understand the things that they can do individually, both in their homes and their businesses, whether it's protecting themselves from a wildfire or flooding, and also in the community, and working on, encouraging stronger building codes, hardening roofs, getting that kind of information out and just changing the entire kind of paradigm now of where we are.
Yeah, I want to talk about all of this. So
Sure.
let's start first with Allstate and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You guys have partnered to spotlight disaster resilience at a time when the preparedness spending is declining. What inspired the collaboration and what gap are you hoping to fill?
Sure. So again, what inspired the collaboration was knowing that we can't do this alone. It's not just an insurance issue, and working with the chamber, it's important. We're working with an organization that represents a broad swath of companies and interests across the country. So that's part of that, and their reputation is really important for us working together on that. We just know from our experience that in order to really help prepare and to prevent some of the costs going forward after a disaster, you have to start at the beginning. It's pre-mitigation, it's pre-disaster investment, but you have to do that before. And oftentimes, and look, weather-related events are happening more and more. It's not just the large storms that are coming up the coast. I read this morning there's a hurricane that's potentially, or a tropical storm that's coming up now. It's wildfires are happening everywhere, not just in the West. There's hail, tornadoes, and flooding is happening everywhere. So it's really important for us. And what we've done in our 2 reports, last year was a report that really showed and demonstrated that for every dollar spent, we can save $13 in post-disaster costs.
Wow.
And this year, we've gone beyond that and talked about how, in terms of lack of investment, what that can mean when we don't, for every dollar that's not spent, can cost up to $30 later.
Wow. So those are findings specifically from the report?
Specifically from the report.
Wow. Those are incredible. So outside of those findings, I'm curious, lessons-wise, what lessons do you think are most important, coming from a report specifically that you guys did, for businesses, policymakers, and communities to take away?
It's just the idea that we have to prepare. It's happening all the time. There's no single season anymore for specific weather-related events. Like I said, wildfires, tornadoes, it's happening all year round. Have to start thinking about that. Businesses need to start working that in their actual business plans. Families need to be prepared individually. Talk to your insurers. See whether or not there are potentially discounts available. What can you do individually to prepare yourself? And then just thinking about, as in the community, what else can be done.
Yeah. You've made public-private partnerships like this one a real priority. Why are these collaborations important? You talked a little bit about it at the top, and what are the biggest benefits you've seen so far of these type of partnerships?
Sure. Certainly, it's the reputation. We are, I think, aware enough to know that there may be some skepticism from hearing from an insurance company about what they need to do. So I think it's important, certainly, to get that word out. There's scale. We can't do this alone. And working with an organization like the partnership and trying to bring in others into this, it's not just the insurance industry. It's realtors, it's developers, it's builders. It's a bigger picture. There's more players involved here, cross-industry. So those are probably 2 of the key components there in terms of us and why we would want to work with a partner. We just don't have the ability necessary to break through, both individually with consumers and also at the government level, right? It's really important to make that case. And not hearing just directly from Allstate, but working with the U.S. Chamber really has a real impact.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what success looks like. You guys are doing a lot of work now. And so if we succeed in what we're doing now, which is shifting from a reactive to a proactive culture of resilience, preparedness, what does success look like in 2030, say?
So, it's being prepared. It's obviously saving lives first and foremost and protecting people. But it's ensuring that economies can keep moving forward. And certainly part of us working with the chamber is really key part of that. And less disruption. What we're normally seeing is certainly when a big storm comes through, or even, like I said, just smaller flooding events that are happening on a regular basis. That causes disruption to local businesses, employers, individuals. Success in 2030 is if we can get to a point where these types of weather-related events, which are going to continue to increase, there's no doubt, will have less of an immediate impact. And we could start working that in and planning for that more going forward.
Yeah. And so thinking about who we have in the room here right now, what actions do you think our audience can take back to their organizations or communities?
So, some of the things we talked about in the report, like tax incentives and really reaching out to your local officials, your elected officials, and thinking about like what are the incentives, what can people do to try to move government in a way, knowing that funding there's not as much funding certainly going forward, but there are other ways that we can get at this. Reaching out to your insurer, reaching out to your agents, and making sure that are there discounts, what are the tips and tools, what can we actually achieve in order to really get something done today.
Yeah, and like how we were talking about earlier, how you like prepare your home, what are the incentives with your home, what are your, what can you do for your business? This is great. Well, I think we are running out of time. Thank you so much, Rich. Really appreciate having you here, and thank you to everyone, and thank you to Allstate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So in the area around Gulfport and Biloxi, it is a very dire situation tonight.
Authorities are going to be in rescue mode long into this night. This is the worst storm to hit Mississippi in over 35 years.
And the man was like, he was in a panic. I repeat, get to safety, get to the Superdome. I repeat, the ninth wall is underwater, the water is rising, get to safety.
For the people along the Gulf Coast, it is a catastrophe.
Thousands and thousands of New Orleanians streaming westward from
2,000 people a day heading to Texas.
Arkansas
Florida,
will take 20,000 people.
And they are quickly filling up.
The city of Philadelphia has put aside $1 million to take in 1,000.
They now join one of America's greatest population shifts since the Great Depression.
So if you push us out, what's going to be left? If you push us out, where the culture gonna come from?
Here to discuss Floodlines, the future of natural disasters, please welcome Alisa Payne, producer and co-founder of Message Pictures, Catherine Coleman Flowers, founder of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, with Vann R. Newkirk II, senior editor at The Atlantic.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Alisa, and thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us. I know it's a struggle getting here sometimes, so thank you.
Thank you.
Alisa, we are, 3 weeks out from the release of Katrina Come Hell and High Water, which premiered 3 weeks ago on Netflix.
At number one.
At number one, yes.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, this is 20 years after Katrina. What did you learn coming back to this event in this city 20 years later?
Well, what we learned was that much hasn't changed. So Spike Lee was one of our directors. We had Geeta Gandhabir, the episode 1 director. Samantha Knowles was our episode 2 director, and Spike Lee was a third. And we talked a lot with Spike about the need for him to revisit these stories, some of which he had done in his series, When the Levee's Broken, If God's Willing, and The Creek Don't Rise. And I talked about getting new voices from Floodlines, your podcast, et cetera. And he said it's so important that we revisit these people because a lot hasn't changed positively for them, right? And so 20 years later, it was really important for us to set the record straight and show that the infrastructure and all of the same vulnerabilities that they had before still exist.
And for me, Katrina, the reason why I was so keen on revisiting myself is it's this seminal, sort of moment of the climate era, and of our understanding of environmental justice, things like that. What was it like working on that film at the same time when we have fires in Altadena, when people are still recovering from Hurricane Helene? I imagine there was you had a lot of news coming in.
Yeah, our guiding principle was that if we don't learn the lessons from Katrina, again, 20 years later, we're going to keep perpetuating the mistakes that we made. And so while all of this was coming in, we felt vindicated, right? There are people who still, and I know in this audience, we know this, but there are people who really feel that climate change does not exist and is not real. We interviewed a meteorologist that said he was a climate change denier, and I was like, we can't put him on air.
He's a meteorologist who's
Yes.
climate change denier.
Yes.
How's that work?
Exactly. And while these fires are raging, while there's landslides, while there's everything else, we see that there's an administration who is cutting FEMA, who wants to disband FEMA and not give resources to the people that really need them. I'll go into it more later, but again, it was really, and Wendell Pierce, the actor from New Orleans, based from New Orleans, but also had a residence in California, right? Mm-hmm. And so he had been displaced from New Orleans and then had people from Altadena that had been displaced. And what we learned is even though we were all too happy, Americans were all too happy to let this New Orleans, this 80% black and brown city, go to the wayside, Mother Nature does not discriminate. And so we see in California that even celebrity and riches can't save your home.
Catherine, as a daughter of Lowndes County, this historic place in our civil rights imagination and history, what brought you into environmental justice?
Well, I think it was that history. Growing up in Lowndes County with parents who were activists, and actually getting a chance to meet people like Stokely Carmichael and others when I was a kid, I think that it prepared me for the work that I'm doing today, because I didn't understand why they were spraying DDT over our homes, because a lot of the homes were still near areas where at that time they were still growing cotton. And whenever they would spray, whenever the crop dusters, as we called them, would spray over our homes, we could see dead snakes and dead birds and stuff in the roads, and never really thought of that being part of the work that I would be doing, as time went on. I now realize and recognize that that was my early introduction to environmental injustice, and along with that, growing up in rural communities where there was no infrastructure. There was no sanitation infrastructure. My earliest remembrance of a climate disaster for me was Hurricane Camille. That dates me. But Hurricane Camille, I was a kid, and I just remember even later when I was in the military and went to Biloxi when I was stationed there at Keesler, we couldn't go on the beach. You could get sanctioned for going on the beach because it wasn't safe for us to walk on, because there was still a lot of debris from that hurricane. So we just keep reliving these mistakes over and over and over again. And at some point we have to look at our history, what has happened, and hopefully be more prepared, because insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results. And clearly we have seen that this doesn't work.
Well, if we are continually making the same mistakes as a policy, is that a mistake anymore?
That's a good question. I would hope that, I would hope that we get away from the willing suspension of disbelief, because I just remember going to the Miami Beach area. Actually, you and I were there together for a climate conference.
Yeah, we just go on tour together.
Yeah, we should, because we keep intersecting. But going to this climate conference and went there for 3 years, and then for the governor to say that, you can't even use climate change in a state that's clearly dealing with rainy day floods, I just remember years ago when I was teaching a map that was put out by meteorologists that talked about what would happen with sea level rise and which areas would be underwater, and that state would be one of those areas. But to not prepare for it, I think is, and as a policy, what are we doing?
Alisa, one of the things that I found going back to revisit Katrina just 15 years after was the fact that so many young folks did not know about what happened, really, didn't have it as this moment in their history and imagination. Now, 20 years out, what are you finding an opportunity to teach young folks something about this country?
Of course. So we, our episode 2 director, Samantha Knowles, was actually 15 at the time. She's the same age as Leanne Williams, whose voice you all heard over the footage of some of the stills of some of the Katrina footage. And Leanne, of course, was affected because she lived in New Orleans, but Sam was in New York, and she said that she could remember the time, but at the time they were covering looting. At the time they were covering all of this black violence, right? Because they wanted to cover up that the government was being incompetent and allowing her citizens to essentially die, right, under everyone's watch. And so what we see with young people is that, and older people, there's so many people who thought that they knew this story and have come to us and said, we thought we knew it, because that was the 24-hour news cycle. But we taught them more. There was so many revelations. Soledad O'Brien, CNN's media darling, came on and said, everyone was covering this. I did it too. She also told us that there were people making up news. People at CNN were saying, well, such and such is reporting that there's rapes there. And they would make her go. And when she would go, they're like, why aren't you reporting? And she says, I can't corroborate it, right? And so we wanted to change the story and make it about black violence, et cetera, because we knew that we were neglecting not only the environment, but also the people, and we were letting them suffer on American soil. We like to pretend that these people were poor, non-working people. These are the working poor, as we call them in America, but they really are the purveyors of this culture. And behind the scenes, we talked about that. This is the musician who you come and when you go to New Orleans, because we all love to go to New Orleans, we go and we dance to his music. In the daytime, he's a shampoo tech. And then he works in hospitality after he does his gig. And so we go down to New Orleans, we take all this culture, food, et cetera, we go home and throw it up, and then we don't think about them. And so young people were really shocked to know that this country, that particular city that they know from Mardi Gras and partying was treated so badly, and the people who have made it what it was treated so badly. And that it could happen in recent time, in my lifetime, in a lot of cases, their lifetime. My son was a baby when that happened.
And in a lot of cases, it is happening.
Yes,
yeah.
We're seeing it now. I want to shout out our episode 1 director, Geeta Ganabir. It's her birthday today. She's in the front row. Hi,
Happy
Geeta.
birthday, Geeta.
But yeah, it is happening. And you know, it's so interesting because Greta Thunberg, she was big, and all of a sudden I was watching something the other day and I was reading something where it was saying, we don't really hear from her anymore. And it was like one thing when she was cute and young, but once she starts attacking policy, we no longer want to hear, right? We shift the story. And I think it's really important for young people to see that there are still warriors on the front line working, and don't only take what you're getting from the media and ingest it, go the next step and really research it. And now that we're seeing that they're shutting down people, they're shutting down shows, comedians, and et cetera, right? They're killing journalists. It's so important for people like you to do the work, and people like me to do the work, and people like you to do the work. So we're committed at Message Pictures to make sure that we keep doing these stories that set the record straight.
Catherine, I mentioned that you are on a bit of a tour. And you told us backstage that you have a very important stop in that tour in Rome. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I've been invited to the 10th anniversary of the Pope's encyclical, but I will be there to talk about environmental justice here in the United States. And I think that it's important because, you know, as we speak today, about what happened in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast with Katrina, a lot of that population, especially the black population, is Catholic. And I think one of the messages I would like to take is that they have a responsibility to investing and correcting the problem and being part of the solution. because I just remember doing Katrina, a lot of people ended up coming north of I-65 became a one-way going north, and at that particular time a lot of people from New Orleans and throughout the Gulf Coast were coming up there to evacuate. And but it was the Catholic Church. There was the two black Catholic churches in Montgomery. St. Jude, which is part of the civil rights movement, because that's where the marches stopped. But there's also Resurrection Catholic Church, and they were resettling people that were coming from New Orleans. So I like to tell that story, but also talk about St. James and St. John's Parish, and what's happening in Cancer Alley, and what is the Catholic Church's philosophy in dealing with this, especially when their parishioners are suffering. And also, if you look at the history of the area and the role that the church may have played and what is happening and manifesting now. And I think that it would be, I had actually reached out to a priest and asked him, what should I say? He said, tell the truth. So that's what I plan to do. I'll tell the truth. So
just to be clear, you're going to go tell the Pope the truth?
Yes. Well, the Pope is supposed to be Creole. So he needs to be connected with his history.
I find now, especially with our current climate in the United States, with all the rollbacks of everything, and environmental justice programs, folks who've gotten grants on the ground, more people are looking toward the international community for figuring this out. Are you seeing that in your own work? Well, when I first started doing the work on sanitation, they did not acknowledge, most people did not acknowledge that there were people in this country that didn't have working toilets, that there was raw sewage on the ground. They didn't acknowledge that hookworm was a thing in the United States. It was supposed to be a third world issue. But it was our work with Columbia University, the Human Rights Institute, and actually going to the UN and inviting the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty to come to the United States to see. That was part of our efforts to raise it on an international level, hopefully so that the people here couldn't ignore it. And I'm sure that the politicians at the time when they went out of the country, people were asking them, why is there raw sewage on the ground in the richest nation in the world? So I believe that the international stage can shine a light where the national stage, falls short of doing that, because we were told that nobody would cover sanitation issues because it wasn't sexy. And people didn't want to know about it, and we weren't close to a major media market, but we proved them wrong by first breaking our story on hookworm with The Guardian, which was an international newspaper. And from there, I think it allowed the local and the national media to start paying attention because they couldn't ignore it anymore. I would be remiss if I didn't note that Lowndes County itself has been the target of these rollbacks, right? Yes, Lowndes County has been a target from the very beginning, not only of rollbacks, but if you go back to our history and look at, for those that don't know and haven't seen Lowndes County in the fight for Black Power, Lowndes County was actually where the original Black Panther Party was founded. It was the center of voting rights, and now we're the center of environmental justice. But Lowndes County people at that particular time, who were mostly sharecroppers, ended up making a mark that people recognize internationally. We're going to do the same thing with sanitation and environmental justice, despite the rollbacks. Alisa, we're talking, this panel is supposed to be the future of natural disasters. And we've been talking about history a lot. I want to ask you, what is your philosophy, or what is your approach to using history to inform how we think about the future?
Well, in this particular case, like I said before, we have not learned the lessons, right? So trying to figure out what we did right, if we did anything right, and what we can improve upon. When we think about Katrina in particular, so Katrina, as a New Yorker, I was kind of like, wait, what is a levee? How is right? So there are two types of levees. There's an earthen levee, which is the tall hill, right? And then there's the flood walls that they created. The United States Corps of Engineers created that, and they made that about 12 foot tall, and it was supposed to withstand a Category 3 hurricane, right? And so they did the year 15 months before, they did a simulation with the Corps of Engineers, and FEMA did Hurricane Pam, and they found out that if there was anything above a Category 3, that these walls would not help, the pumping stations would not help, et cetera. Katrina is a Category 5. Looking to 2025, you go back, the walls have not been fortified. They have plugged in the holes that broke the levee, the holes that broke in those walls. They have not been made taller, right? And we know that they're in a hurricane belt. So our job is to point out all of the things that, the truth, first of all, is set the record straight, that the government did not do her job. They left our citizens, called them refugees, left them, abandoned them, neglected them on purpose. And we still haven't learned. And we only see increased climate disasters. We're seeing landslides in North Carolina, in Georgia. We're seeing flooding, excessive flooding in Texas. It's not getting better. I always said to the team, how is it that we can go over to Amsterdam and we can go to Denmark and we don't see these? People are living by the water. You don't see these huge walls. Somehow they figured it out, right? So we need to, as we always want to point to the truth, and we always want to push people further and say, okay, I need to make a difference, and we hope that we did that with this.
What are folks in New Orleans telling you now about the documentary?
Well, I am very proud to say that the repeat people that came in, so we have Phyllis Montana LeBlanc, who was in both levees, and If God's Willing, said that after being in both of those, and 20 years later, just the fact that we really said it overtly, that that was systemic racism, and we gave it a name, made her feel she wasn't crazy, and finally gave her her healing. And that's why we do the work. We want them to heal. Leanne said that when she watched Phyllis back then, she felt like, wow, if I could only do that, I could have my healing. And she had her healing in this process. So they are so excited to tell their stories. And what we've also found is that young people have been taking to TikTok and spreading their stories, because we know that storytelling is cathartic, storytelling is healing, storytelling is empowering, and can be the catalyst to change.
Catherine, we were just talking about refugees, refugees after Katrina. Now we have this concept of climate refugees, of people who are being forced out of their homes or choosing to move because of their climates being devastated. And I want to ask you, how do we connect the experiences of people who went through things like Katrina, who are going through things like having to move after a fire, with this term that to us sounds very international, that sounds like that's an over there problem and not an our problem?
Well, I guess the way we connect them is through storytelling, because most places around the world are experiencing climate disasters now, whether they're fires, whether there's water that's drying up because of water scarcity. I'm a part of another organization that deals with climate, and we can see where it's been extremely hot in some places, where it has changed the way people walk in the streets, because the streets are starting to pretty much melt. So I think telling the stories and helping people to connect and realize they're not alone. But also in telling these stories, there may be those who have solutions that they can share. Like she just mentioned Amsterdam. They've been dealing with this for years and years and years, and yet we pretend like the knowledge does not exist. We have to find another way to become more resilient, more sustainable, because it's not about if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen.
It's so funny. My son used to do the Billion Oyster Project in the Hudson, and I'd be like, ooh, I would never swim in that. I don't care how many oysters they put there. We go to Copenhagen, and people are jumping in the water, and I'm like, and they're like, yeah, the oysters cleaned it, right? So they were ahead of us, and we learned that from them. Like you said, let's take the knowledge from other places and institute it here.
I want to ask both of you very quickly before we get out of here. I've been thinking a lot about sort of what you were talking about, Catherine, which is the intersection of democracy and climate change and the climate movement. It seems clear now that the only way forward is to get people to exercise their democratic rights. How is your work moving in that intersection?
Well, I spend a lot of time with young people. And basically what I say to them, first of all, whatever it is that they're passionate about, get involved and take action. And also include with that action voting. Because if voting wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying to keep us from doing it. And I believe that that's the only way we're going to get to where we need to go. We're going to have to do the action. We're going to have to also vote at the same time. And we're going to have to vote our convictions and keep doing it over and over and over again until we get the answers that we need. Because clearly, they are afraid of what the future holds. Because they're the ones that's going to inherit all that we don't do. And my mission and what drives me is the fact that we have to do this in such a way that it will impact the 7th generation.
I believe that is our time. Thank you. Thank you.